Hello and welcome back to the Ideal Wealth Grower video channel. I hope you will enjoy today's video. We will talk about something that is maybe not so obvious to you all the time, and I call it the magic of four. Have you ever thought about the fact that there are a lot of things that actually happen in sets of four? So I put a few things together and I want to connect them somehow. How do they actually apply and why are they relevant to us as ideal wealth growers? So a few examples. What comes in sets of four is, for example, meals, right? You have an appetizer, you have the main course, and then you have dessert. And if it was a really good meal, you have maybe a cognac or a glass of wine or a cup of coffee at the end. Then you have things like regular things that we all do pretty much every day without really ever thinking about it. That would be sleep. Right? You have probably, if you ever listened or heard anything about sleep and how that really works, is you go to sleep and you're kind of falling asleep, and then you are in kind of like the initial sleep where you're not really relaxing all that much, but you're kind of getting deeper and deeper. And then there is something called REM sleep. That's where you really relax. That's where you really get into the sleep, and that's where all that energy comes. I oftentimes say sleep is basically like recharging the battery, as if you were to kind of plug into the universal recharger, and that is actually what fills the battery up overnight. And then you have the fourth part, and that is the awakening before you get up from sleep. You have probably heard about the Four Musketeers, and there are oftentimes a lot of concepts that are being provided or that are being analyzed by people, and that is 4 pillars of this or 4 pillars of that. Now, when we get away from these kind of conceptual things and think a little bit more about what actually happens in the real world, other than sleep that we just talked about, I would say if you really go big picture, then you would see life is also kind of separated and broken into 4 main parts. So the first one would be birth. And then even the phase after birth, so basically from when you are a little baby all the way until like 4, 5, 6 years old, that is kind of the first part of life. And then we have the school part of life, and that school part of life is typically from like 5, 6 years old. And depending on how far you're actually taking it, let's say until like 19, 20 if you go to high school, maybe into 24, 25 if you go to college. And if you really take it further, then it can be into your late 20s until you actually really get out of college and into work life. And that is actually the third part, getting into work life. And our work life traditionally, like in the 20s and now the early parts of the 21st century, used to be from probably like early to mid 20s into the mid 60s. So you could say your work life is oftentimes seen as this 40-year period during which you work your way from the beginning, like maybe apprentice level, into mastery and becoming an expert and maybe even becoming an executive. And that's your work life. And then there comes retirement that typically starts in the early to mid 60s. And with our typical life expectancy is about another 20 years till about like early 80s, mid 80s or something like that. And the further we go in the evolution, we probably gonna become more and more used to having people like 85, 95, maybe even 100. So anywhere between 20 to 30 years after you retire, that is your retirement part. So you could say life is also surprisingly falling into the category of the magic 4 pieces of the whole. And so how does this actually relate? Like, why is this relevant to us as ideal wealth growers? And I wanted to bring this to you because what we do in our system and in our thinking is also related to 4 steps and 4 phases. The first phase I call the Piggy Bank phase. You may have birthdays, you may have other opportunities, and even then while you're working maybe through high school, you have little odd jobs here and there, and depending on how you're being raised, you might be encouraged to save a little bit of money because you want to buy yourself a bicycle, or you might want to buy yourself a car. Now, if you were an early, like super early ideal wealth grower, I would tell you, well, you might want to get some of these things, But what would be really cool to prepare for that whole arch of life would be if you could start saving early to have some money and let that money work for you. So that would be number one, the piggy bank phase. Now the second phase, when you actually get out of college, is what I would call the accumulation phase. I recommend, if you can somehow find a way to do it, is to find a way to put $1,000 away into what I call an accumulation savings account, so that you can actually start putting money together. Now, if that's too much for you, even though you might, when you ask yourself, find out, who else do I have? You might not have kids, you may not have a spouse yet, you may not have a house yet, you may not have a lot of fancy things, a lot of memberships and stuff like that costs a lot of money. Your biggest expense on a regular basis after college is probably some form of rent if you made it out of your parents' house, and the tuition a bit either for college or then the college loans, the debt that you might have after getting out of there. That's your biggest expense. So if you get a relatively reasonable job, mid-level job, or even a good job, it might not be that hard to put about $1,000 a month aside into your accumulation savings account. So that's the second step in the system that you want to have. Now, why are you doing that? What's the piggy bank and the accumulation account for? Well, the money that accumulates is then going to be used, if you're applying our system, to actually start purchasing residential properties. Literally buying houses. And why are we buying houses? Because the need for shelter, the need to be able to have a place to live as a young family or as a couple is never going to go away. So it's a really good place to invest, and it's a good thing that you're doing for humanity. I'm always saying, win a victory for humanity, because that's actually what my alma mater, when I graduated from school, that's what we were saying. Don't allow yourself to die until you win a victory for humanity. And one of the victories for humanity that I'm striving for, and I hope you would too, is that you actually try to actually provide shelter, provide housing, provide a nice property to somebody who is earlier in their development and they need to rent a place. So we like to buy good location, high quality, well renovated houses. Guess what? Number 4 is at a fair price, both for what we pay for it as well as what the tenant pays for rent. And as we keep doing this, each one of those houses is going to give us a little bit of what's called positive cash flow. And in our goal setting, when you actually want to be an ideal wealth grower, in our goal setting, we identify a number that we think we need to have as income coming in, so that we no longer have to exchange our time for money. And if you really think about it, that's what you do when you're in these 40 years of work. You're exchanging time for money. So most people, especially younger people, want to get away from that, want to get out of this exchange of time for money. And what happens when you reach that point where you can actually decide, do I still want to go to work or not anymore? When you have the freedom to make that decision, we call that point to reach economic independence. So from getting to start your accumulation account to the point of economic independence where you no longer have to exchange time for money, that is the third phase. And then you decide, well, I don't want to go to work, or I want to do something for a charity, or some people might say, like me, yes, I have reached that economic independence point, but I still like to do the stuff I do. I still like to do the videos. I still like to help people make their investments, and I still like to buy more houses and accumulate more ideal wealth grower wealth. So that's actually why I'm still here and still doing this instead of sitting at the beach. So what happens then in the fourth phase is you're working your way closer and closer to financial independence. And financial independence is when you don't just have enough money to pay for your bills and basically decide if you want to go to work or not, but if you have so much money, or when you have so much money, that you can buy things that aren't really necessarily needed. Right? In economic independence, if you have the need for transportation, you get an affordable, economic, well-working car. And that's what you use to drive around. Or you be conscious on what kind of airline tickets, when that comes available again, what kind of tickets would you buy and how much would you pay for it? With financial independence, you have gotten to a point where you can say, I always fly first class because I have so much money coming in, I can afford it. I'm buying the car because I want to have the car. Robert Kiyosaki, one of the people that I like a lot from Rich Dad Poor Dad, one of the seminal books in this whole industry. So he, for example, likes Ferraris and really fancy cars. And he can afford it because he has gone from economic independence to financial independence. So that's the fourth phase. So let me summarize again. You start with a little piggy bank, then you go to the accumulation account number 2, then you get to economic independence, and if you keep going accumulating, then you get to number 4, financial independence. And I hope you see there's a magic somehow in the number 4, because it happens all over and around us, and we are constantly surrounded by it. So I want you to take a look at where are you, write in the comments, where are you on these 4 steps on the journey towards financial independence, and what kind of other magical 4 things that fit together into a sequence like that are you aware of? Because I would really be interested to hear what kind of foursomes, so to speak, you are aware of and that you're applying. So I hope you like this video, and if you do, you would really help us if you click the like button, if you ring the little notification bell, so you would get a notification every time we post a new video. And really what would help us the most are 2 things to do. So it's really amazing, right? 4, you like, you ring the bell. Number 3, you subscribe. And number 4, one thing that really helps us grow the channel is you share it with your networks on Facebook, on Instagram, on all these kind of different social media platforms that you might be on, Twitter or something like that. So I hope you liked the video. We will be back with more information like this for you next time. And until then, have a good day.